Hey everyone, welcome back to Valley Chat. Pastor Scott Seidler here with Pastor John Carolus. And today we are continuing, or really beginning, our conversation around the series we are currently in, The Next Generation, talking about not only the work that God does through us and bringing others into the church, but also the opportunities we have here at Shepherd, especially in regard to the renovation of our Shea campus. Pastor Scott, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Had a great launch this past weekend, October 26th. We had Reformation Sunday, but more than Reformation, it was our confirmation for 5 boys in our congregation who confessed their faith and gave a witness about their intention to live as Christians. And that is a perfect parallel for our next generation capital campaign and building initiative that we are in to put those two together as the congregation sees in front of them the next generation of Christianity, witnessing their faith, asking and answering the question, what will we do in order to ensure that we leave behind a legacy at church for them to occupy as they get older? We've been around for 45 years. In 45 more years, those kiddos will be 60 years old, which is just crazy to think about. And it was just a good launch for this past weekend, and I can't be more thrilled than to get into this capital funding initiative and look forward to where our building goes here in 2026. What about you, John? How are things over on the Mountain View campus? You had 2 confirmations over there.
Yeah, it was great. Just wonderful statements from the guys who shared their faith, and really a wonderful testament to a lot of newer faces that we've been having visit us at Mountain View, to understand that we really are a church that desires the growth and development of each of its members. And so we touched a little bit on, the conversations we try to have with people around what's God doing in your life, character calling, consolation, confession. Where's God leading you in the future, and how might he be leading you in relation to this particular project? I loved the Ephesians 4 metaphor, building together the body of Christ.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
building a building at Shepherd, but the opportunity we have to contribute to that project also creates bonds and relationships between our worshiping populations that are super valuable. So it was a great Sunday, a great service, and super blessed to have the opportunity to celebrate the confirmations of those guys over there too.
Yeah, I was struck by the word in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul using the we. We will be growing. We will be working toward the full maturity and character of Christ. He wasn't just advising at a distance those lowly Ephesians. He was including himself in this partnered collegial walk toward glory, each part of the body contributing whatever needs to be contributed by God through them for the sake of the body. And so I made a big deal about how the Apostle Paul's not just pointing the finger at others, he's pointing his finger back at himself and saying, I too am always in need of growing up in the grace of Jesus Christ and the generosity, the ministry service that goes with it.
Yeah, I love that passage because normally you use it in terms of talking about church workers, professional people in ministry, and how they are a gift to the church, which is true. But I love how Paul turns the dial a little bit and says their whole purpose is just to equip you, the people who are reading this letter, the people who are worshiping together in church, to do the work of God. And I touched a little bit on the phrase, you're doing the Lord's work. And really the Lord's work is the work that he's got you doing, no matter what your job might be. And so we have that opportunity to pursue the things in front of us as the Lord's work, whether we're pastors or we're CPAs or retirees, we have that opportunity. And Ephesians 4 is more of a general conversation around spiritual warfare and unity and division in the church, the opportunity we have to serve one another. This week, we're looking at 2 Corinthians 9, where Paul is really making a specific appeal to the church in Corinth, asking them for financial support of the Judean church, who is experiencing a much different kind of lifestyle moment, which is probably the most gentle way to say persecution and poverty that I've ever uttered. And he's asking them really to just to contribute, to dig in, to invest in their financial resources for the good of their neighbors in the faith in Judea, which brings up kind of a a stereotypical conversation in the church or an uncomfortable one sometimes, money, the church, tithing, pastors, fundraising. There's all kinds of maybe tension or awkwardness or uncomfortability around discomfort around that topic. But Scott, do you find that to be something that's challenging to talk about, exciting to talk about? How's that kind of gone over the years in your ministry?
Think I've gotten some muscle memory talking about it. So the early years of ministry where I was kind of clumsily, kind of addressing that issue as a young man, talking to, more seasoned, mature, older adults, it was a little bit of an offset. Now that I'm in my 50s, I can speak pretty comfortably about it. Someone once said in my presence, or maybe I read it, I'm not even sure where I got it from, but it's kind of been rooting around in my head. In life, you're doing one of two things. You're either earning money or you're spending it. It's very rare that you're doing neither. Leisure time, vacations, cars, clothes, house, you're spending money, or you're actually doing something that brings in some dollars. And so our life, as much as it is a spiritual life, it is also a moneyed life. And therefore, in the church, while people get really touchy about money, the fact of the matter is that it is truly, no irony, the sum and substance of our existence. Jesus said you cannot serve both God and money, but you have to serve both of them separately. They're both in play. There's no other axis around which we base our lives than those two. On the one hand, serving God or serving money. And so I just take it as kind of a pastoral responsibility, discreetly, cautiously, respectfully. Here's the deal. We are either earning it or we are spending it. And if we are earning it in a godly way, great. And if we're spending it in a godly way, great. Let's keep on going. What about you, John? How are you doing at 30 with these early days of capital campaigning?
You know, uh, a couple of things jump to mind. First of all, just kind of the scriptural principle that, in all the wisdom literature, a great amount of language is focused on finances or resources, material resources, whether it's actually currency or property of some kind.
Yep.
And so it's very clear that the scriptures are not silent when it comes to finances and money. And so it doesn't
Nope.
need to be something we have to be silent about either. I'm also reminded of a great quote from someone who we were talking about kind of end of life decisions and wills, kind of those kinds of conversations.
Sure.
And there's always a lot of tension, it seems, around families when it comes to distributing the family fortune, if you will, or
Yeah.
the the
Inheritance. Right.
accumulation of the figurehead, to the
Right.
children or the grandchildren. And this individual said, it does carry a lot of potential conflict. Money can divide people. Money can create conflict. Money can cause problems. But just as it can cause problems, it also can bring people together. It can be a great resource through which relationships are made better and deeper, and it can be used for just as much good as it can be used for bad. And that
Right.
really shifted kind of my own thinking about how to approach finances, because typically it's like, if you see dangerous course ahead, just avoid it at all costs. But when you can navigate dangerous terrain with wisdom and skill, you
Mhm.
might actually experience a much more meaningful kind of journey. And so personally, I see a uh, great value pursuing the wisdom and skill necessary to engage in financial conversation, whether it be talking to someone about how they should wrap their mind around tithing, or just what it means to actually balance the checkbook and get to a place where you are living sustainably according to the gifts that God has given you.
Right.
So it's like you said, it's an inescapable factor in our lives. And one that as Christians we've got a responsibility to be talking about together, just as much as we talk about relationships, family, vocation, and beliefs, all of that stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. I have found that a family's witness about what they do with finances will carry on. Renee and I spend a lot of time trying to give an example of what generosity means through our financial support, of course, of our kids, but of causes that we are supportive of, the gospel ministry, and also humanitarian causes, social justice. I think one of the most important things that we can do is as adults, especially toward our kids, is to give an example. It's not just about making sure our estate or wills or bequests are all lined up, and we've talked with our financial advisor and tax consultant, but more than that, that over the course of a lifetime, on balance, we've given an example of what generosity and what the proper place of money in a marriage, in a family looks like. Um, I have disabused myself of trying to control how my kids will act with and in light of money, but I know that I can control myself, and with Renee, we can control our household. And so we've tried to give always and show an attitude of generosity. It has not always been the easiest thing on a pastor's salary over the years. It's gotten a little easier the older I get. But nevertheless, trying to do that each and every day, each and every month, year, it's just a critical kind of capacity. Hey, let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. What are some of the themes or points that you're going to be taking out of that passage as you go into Mountain View's messaging this weekend?
Yeah, a couple of things really. One, just to kind of alleviate a little bit of the potential tension in the room when you get Paul writing such a clear appeal for financial support, where it isn't one of those things that you can kind of metaphor your way out of. It's like, no, Paul's asking for money so that the people in Judea can eat and live, and they can care for their needs. And he's actually saying that this is a tangible way you can engage in the work of God in the lives of others, and these gifts are going to be sacrifices of thanksgiving for him. But
Right.
loading it up that much can create kind of a bit of, I think, apprehension to the modern ear, to the modern heart. And so one thing I want to do is talk about how Paul is a brilliant leader, brilliant scholar, brilliant theologian, spiritually full leader, but also he's a practical one. And so what he's doing is fundraising. And when
Yeah.
we kind of frame it that way, not to take away from the spiritual depth of it by any means or to dismiss it in any way, but it does help us, I think, to get our hands on it a little bit more easily. Paul's
Yeah.
fundraising, and he's actually fundraising in a really effective way, because then he appeals to Psalm 112 in the reading for today when he's talking about what the generous and the wealthy say. They shall share freely, give generously to the poor. Their good deeds will be remembered forever. And so he's appealing to their deeply held value and beliefs for the Psalms themselves, and being associated into, grafted into this family of God that carries this rich tradition with them. And
Right.
so those are a couple of the points I want to make, where Paul's now inviting these mixture of Gentile and Jewish believers
Sure.
into participating in the kind of the beautiful, meaningful tradition that they have been grafted into by putting their trust in Jesus as their Savior. So those are a couple of things I want to touch on, just to kind of open up the conversation a little bit for us. But how about you? What of those verses is particularly striking?
Yeah, whenever I talk about generosity and financial support of the ministry, I recognize that Paul's words are comprehensive, and they can be therefore overwhelming to a new or young giver, donor, whatever you want to call them. One who is not used to financially supporting the ministry, or maybe has never really stepped into charitable generosity in any way.
Mm.
So what I try to do is I try to break down things a little bit and say, okay, look, I'm not looking to get you to be like some, so-called Albert Schweitzer old school philanthropist that, is giving millions and millions of dollars away. But is there a possibility that you could increase a characteristic of generosity that Paul is touching on here in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9? One of the things that I've always taught is, three qualities of a giver, of a generous heart: intentional, sacrificial, and joyful. Intentional, you choose and decide in advance what you're going to give. Sacrificial, it pinches a little bit. It's not easy. It shouldn't suffocate or demolish your spirit, but it should cause you to maybe say, wow, I could get more Starbucks, or I could buy a better car than I have with this money that I'm giving away. So intentional, sacrificial, and then finally joyful. That is the opposite of sacrificial pinch is a joyful heart. Where do I find my joy in that kind of pinch? And so intentional, sacrificial, and joyful. Second Corinthians 9 verse 7, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give.
Hmm.
And that's really the challenge. What is the decision of your heart? Because those characteristics are coming from your heart. They're not just cerebral things. It's not just a ledger or checkbook calculation. It's a decision of the heart. And so that's kind of what I try to push, because if I can, increase in every season those categories or qualities of a giver, then on balance over the course of a lifetime, I've got people that are on a trajectory to being truly generous the older they get.
I think too, there's so much really, uh, there's so much potential fruit and harvest in the idea that generosity is very little to do with the level of resources or comfort you might have in your life.
Right.
It really has far more to do the attitude toward whatever resources you might have, whether it be time, talent, or treasure. And I
Yep.
know those are a little bit churchy cliches to talk about how are you giving at church.
Sure.
Um, but some of the most generous people could be some of the least wealthy people or some of the most wealthy people and
Sure.
really you tell more so kind of by talking and engaging with them than the numbers you might see in a giving statement or something like that. Um, and so I think it's a beautiful way to talk about what is that next step for me in generosity. I
Yeah.
may not be able to form a concrete picture of how I want to be generous when I'm 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80. I might not be able to understand right exactly what that looks like, but I think I can consider sort of what's the next nearest step for me? What would it take? Is it an attitude adjustment? Is it a monetary adjustment, an amount difference? Is it a level of joy or intent? So I like those three factors when it comes to generosity. I think it really helps us in the conversation of how am I becoming more generous. Another
Yeah.
thing I want to think about too is kind of the historical change in terms of financial relationships to church over the centuries, because there's a lot of chatter out there over the years about the church's relationship with its members and money, going all the way back to, you can go into a church in Europe and see the chief donor's likeness painted onto the stained glass or carved into the stone
Right.
blocks. It was commonplace for donors' names and amounts to be printed in the bulletin in the 20th century,
Right.
and so there's definitely all manner of different kind of types of relationships, finances, givers, and charities had over the years. And recognizing that too, I think, is an important part of opening up the conversation today. What do you understand about that? How does that impact your views about generosity? And as you have been obviously an expert in churchiology, ecclesiology, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, how do you kind of recognize that pattern? And where do you kind of see, just in general, the trend of generosity and congregations kind of going in the years ahead?
Yeah. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Foundation, when I took a class years ago, they talked about the attitudinal spectrum of donors. That is to say, every donor gives because of a reason. There's a motivation there. On the one side, it's very consumeristic. I give in proportion to what I feel I'm receiving.
Hmm.
I like the youth ministry, and I want to make sure that my kids have a youth ministry. I feel like that's worth about $25 a week in the offering plate. Great. And then up and down the ladder. On the other side, there is I give because it's the right thing to do. And it may not be 10% of my income, but it is a in advance intentional sacrificial decision. And I'm not looking to get anything out of it. I would think here about, kind of the homebound, shut-in older adult who still writes the check, even though the pastor's only coming to see him or her once a month. But I give to the church. Why? Because I'm supposed to give to the church. And it's the right thing to do. I value the ministry of the gospel. I value Shepherd of the Desert in our case, and therefore I want to write that check. So on the one side, there's a recognition more in the church that, you know, attitudes are varied, and therefore the church needs to give expression or answer to those attitudinal impulses. So just recently we put out our member statement, kind of end of year member statement as we make our way into the holidays. And we sent with it an infographic, which was essentially a statement of, hey, in case you don't know, Shepherd's ministry is really valuable. Wouldn't you like to continue supporting this? Now, for some members, that's going to be great. For other members, they don't really care. For other members, because they're just giving because it's the right thing to do. On the other side, if those infographics of achievement are not touching the experienced, lived out by the other members who are maybe more consumeristic, they're going to say, well, what does that have to do with me? So,
Mhm.
we recognize this in church, and I think it's probably always been that way. I think that in our, more dreamy 1950s kind of giving mentality, we wanted to always think that people were giving because they thought it was the right thing to do and because God wanted them to do it, something along those lines. But now we're coming to realize there's a lot of different reasons that spur people on to this work of generosity. So that's one of the things I really try to keep in mind.
Yeah, lately in worship, when it comes to the offering, I try to first recognize that offering is a form of worship, just like singing is, and it has been for as long as singing has. And
Yeah.
it isn't something where, although there are some very tangible connections, and there's nothing wrong per se with the attitude of I'm giving because I want my church to keep going. I want the lights to stay on. I want us not to default on loans. I want the facilities to be usable. But there also is kind of the opportunity for us to consider it kind of in that other side of what you were saying. It's the right thing to do. It's just a part of being a part of this congregation. It also is an opportunity for us to worship uh, kind of with with things as opposed to strictly with my thoughts or with my words or with my heart, if that makes sense. And I know that may or may not resonate with kind of our little bit of a post enlightenment rational dichotomy kind of society that we have today,
Right.
but
Right.
but I love the idea that it can be thought of as more than just kind of a transaction between a worshiping body and the people
Perfect.
who participate in that, and kind of the whole spectrum between here and there. Um, it's funny. I think most of the sermon illustrations I remember from my childhood have something to do with generosity, and so I might pull some of those out of the archives, just to throw in and see if they still land in the 2025. I'm sure there's 21st century because my waking memories of the 20th century are limited, but
Yeah,
uh,
I think you should do a top 10 list of things that Dave Carolus has said about generosity that you and your family have overheard and, do a deep dive on whether or not they're still valid. And then send the recording to your dad and say, hey, just so you know, I got some thoughts.
that would be
Take
great.
it for what it's worth.
Yep, let them Facebook Live a reaction, get a little
That's
little
right.
interchurch play going on. Yeah, that'd
That's
be
right.
fun.
I love
As
it.
we look ahead, as we kind of wrap things up, what is it about this campaign from a spiritual perspective are you most excited for in the life of the congregation?
Yeah, if I'm going to be really super honest, so do you want me to be honest with you?
Oh yeah.
Here's really what I want. Let's get this done. We've got a 45-year-old campus, and it is absolutely a no-brainer for us to refurbish, refresh, improve upon what has been left to us from 45 years ago. We've got necessary maintenance that has lapsed for way too long. And every day we spend on this dilapidated campus, on our North Campus. Lovely church, don't get me wrong, but it is a dilapidated building. It is so far out of step by like 3 generations of architectural and interior design. We have to get this done because, and here's the reason, and I will say this during church, we have to get this done because we got more important things to do.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for as long as we've spent on the planning, the architecture, the convincing, the funding, the fundraising, the this, the that, we are short-circuiting God's work of ministry. So what excites me is not necessarily the project, although the project's going to be great fun and it's going to be a beautiful outcome. But it's on the other side of the project. I did not come here and move my family 6 years ago to build stuff and to renovate and to raise money. My job and your job as a pastor is to lead in the gospel ministry in a community that is white for the harvest, rich harvest before us. So that is what excites me. I can't wait to be done with this so that we can get on with the real work of ministry. And I think that's where the heartbeat of our congregation is really at.
Yeah, I think that
I don't know if
no,
you were prepared for that, but I'm
that's
just talking.
beautiful. Nothing is as exciting as the ministry that this kind of tangible project is going to facilitate down the road. And I know for me, like something that really inspires me about the project is just that the main people who are benefiting from this project aren't going to be staff. An exciting thing for me is that the staff offices are moving out of the sanctuary building so that all of this new square footage, all this beautiful architecture, all of this great space can be used by the people worshiping in the sanctuary, those gathering for fellowship in the new lobby, the Bible studies that are going to spread out into the different sized rooms, conference room, meeting rooms,
Right.
to talk about God's word, to dive into life with each other and grow in their faith. And should we be invited into some of those conversations, and we'll make our way over from Building A into the conversations there in the sanctuary building. But it's just gonna be really cool for me to see our church embrace the life of faith together through worship and through study in that space. And hopefully not only through worship and study, but also through service for a community as well. So it's always a great conversation. I'm excited for this weekend and for the next 4 weeks as we continue the project, all of it culminating in all church worship, Shepherd Thanksgiving, Commitment Sunday. It's going to be great.
Lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thanks, John, for a good conversation. Blessings on your worship and preaching this weekend. We'll catch up again next week and see where we're going next.
Likewise. Talk to you soon.
See you, man.